Right, good morning, and thank you all for joining us for this Shaping Resilient, Sustainable Cities for Thriving Communities session. So my name's Stuart Leslie. I'm a director at the National Wealth Fund in our local authority advisory and lending team, and I'll be moderating this session today with the fantastic panel that I have here to my left. So just to kind of position the session, and then we'll go on to some introductions in a moment. Really, the focus of this session is to think about how cities such as Leeds and Manchester in particular are going about trying to lead the way in thinking about place and putting place really at the heart of the way in which they bring forward sustainability initiatives within their regions. We're looking at that across a multitude of sectors, so around green infrastructure, low carbon transport, energy efficient buildings, smart technology, but also underpinning all of that, the real importance of community engagement that sits alongside that when bringing a community with you to deliver a sustainable city. So with that in mind, I think a large part of the conversation today, we really want to focus on some of the programmatic aspects that bring together all of the different component parts of developing these place-based solutions for sustainability in our cities, recognising that there's a huge amount of interconnectedness between all the different disciplines that we face, where we face challenges in delivering in our local areas. So yes, there's some complexity there, but also it's about how we look to break that down. So when we think about sustainable transport and when we think about energy efficiency, renewable energy generation, how that can be a catalyst for overall regional economic growth. So when we're thinking about from a perspective of supporting local growth plans and the aspirations that cities have in those areas, that we're doing that in a way that really is having sustainability at its core, but with sustainability also being a real catalyst to that development and that wider growth narrative that we're looking to achieve in our places. So with that in mind, I'll maybe just hand straight over to some introductions to the panel. We do have an hour today. We've got a lot to cover, so I'm sure we'll get into it very, very nice and quickly, but maybe 60 seconds from each of you, just saying who you are and a bit of background. So John, maybe if I can start with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Hi, everyone. John Reid. As of 2 months ago, I've joined the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and I'm something called the Senior Responsible Owner for the Mass Transit scheme, which I think means it's my fault if it all goes wrong. Previously, I've done a lot of work in railway enhancements and other local transport schemes, generally trying to take them from the point of something needs to be done through to here's a funded deliverable programme that the engineers can go and build.
Hello everybody, my name's Chris Hammond. I'm from UK 100. We are a local government climate network that operates across the UK. We've got 122 members, which covers both urban and rural authorities and a different tier. And we think that it's really important that the sector collaborates together, that it shares its assets, it shares its kind of planning, it shares where things are working and where things aren't. And together we can meet really ambitious climate goals at a time which is really challenging for the sector.
Hi everybody, my name's Amy House. I'm Director of Green Economy, which is part of the Growth Company. Our mission is to accelerate the net zero transition, and we do this by delivering business support to businesses looking to decarbonise, improve their environmental performance and increase their resource efficiency. We also deliver support to grow local green tech and services supply chains, and we work with local authorities to share that intelligence, deliver those supported programmes. I think one thing that Green Economy does that's very unique is we understand the importance of making sure that when businesses and local authorities are investing in that net zero transition, that those investments are made locally so that the local economy can benefit from the investments that are being made.
Thank you. Hi everybody, my name's Katie Dye. I'm a councillor for Killingbeck and Seacroft, which is a ward in East Leeds and is the ward that I spent my early years in. I am the chair of a committee that Leeds City Council has called the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee, which looks at all things climate related essentially across the city. And I'm also the co-chair of the Leeds Climate Commission, which is not council related. It has a group of very talented commissioners across the city, again looking to accelerate our progress in Leeds.
Thank you, and thank you all very much for your introductions. We're going to start off with the first theme for the session around kind of building public trust in infrastructure. And John, if I can maybe come to you first, I think in the context of your work at West Yorkshire, thinking about the mass transit opportunities for Leeds city centre, how are you thinking about that challenge, and particularly in relation to translating kind of that activity into productivity and jobs?
Yeah, no, thanks. And I'd love to say there's a really simple, short answer I can give you, but I don't have that one. I mean, I think a lot of what we've got to do at the moment is build trust with people. And there's actually a very long list of people we need to build trust with, whether it's politicians locally, regionally or nationally. I'm very conscious these schemes have big impacts on residents as well, and businesses. And something we're trying to do is really build up the advocacy with shared benefits. And we're very conscious it's very easy with these kind of schemes, whether we move the kind of mass transit schemes we're looking at, it's very easy to talk to them all about steel. It's all good, easy to talk about concrete. Actually, what we kind of really want to start to do is really through the plans you've talked about, like the growth plan and so on, is to talk about what does this mean for people and places, what are the benefits this delivers, and then how can people get behind it with respect to productivity and so on. And I think one of the things we feel we really need to do is, as we kind of mature our thinking about what can a mass transit system do for the region, is to start to get to somewhere like Crossrail did with London. And forgive me because I can't remember their exact slogan, but they had a fantastic slogan which was something like 1 million more people within 45 minutes of jobs in central London. So it kind of I think that was pinned on every banner. It was the front line of every business case document, and it gave people something to believe in, so employers could start to see what it meant, developers could start to see what it meant, and I think that then helped it sort of translate into business planning, into local planning, into city planning as well, and actually regionally, given it does stretch outside London to the east and west. And I think we've got to come up with the same kind of narrative to get the advocacy behind this, build the trust. And I think, frankly, we've got to get to a point where we do what we say we're going to do, and demonstrate that bit by bit, step by step, we take this forward and make it real for people so they can get behind it and make their own investments and choices.
No, thank you, John. And if I can maybe just ask a follow-up on around that. The mass transit is going to be a huge project for Leeds City Centre, but it's also something that, from a community benefit perspective, that tangible benefit there's a really long lead time for that, and a significant amount of disruption for the city centre between now and that moment in time when we have shiny trams or another form of light rail operating in the city. How do you go about kind of sustaining that support and that kind of that public engagement with the process over a project that is going to I suppose bridge multiple years and potentially multiple election cycles?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'll also caveat it with the fact that I don't think we've got a brilliant answer. And I don't think anyone ever does, actually. And if you look at some of the big programs we've got around, I've already mentioned Crossrail, High Speed 2 infamously as well. And I've just come from working on Euston Station in London, where when you meet local residents, the first thing they say to you is, oh, hi, John, I heard this was going to finish in 2025. How's that going then? And, their house their neighbourhood has been a building site for 2 decades, and we still couldn't tell them when the thing would finish. So that's quite an awkward place to be. So I think one of the things we're particularly starting to think about is, as we look at the corridors that the scheme might go down in the future, and there's still a lot of routes in play, what can we do both in terms of choosing the technology to minimise the impact of the construction, but also to look at maybe what could we do more widely to help with diversionary aspects. So, for example, I've just a few years ago I was on the Trans-Pennine route upgrade, which is a fairly local project for here, and the first thing we did was to invest in railway diversionary routes. So we spent a lot of money getting alternative east-west routes right, because we knew that people would rather stay on a train for longer than get off, get a bus, get a train, get a bus, get a train, which is always hell. So we spent that money, and actually we did that before the scheme had been fully funded by the government, but they were willing to sort of place that bet. So we're starting to explore quite creatively what can we do to help minimise disruption, keep that kind of end in mind about the benefits. My sense with these schemes as someone who works on them is people get excited about them. They then realise that you're going to be digging up outside their front house or where they cross the road every day, and they very much go off it very quickly. Then you finish and it's all fine again. So we kind of do recognise that difficult spot in the middle, and we're very conscious of that. And there's some of the things we're trying to do to kind of minimise the pain.
No, thank you, John. And Katie, maybe if I can come to you next in relation to, I suppose, some examples of projects that from your experience you've seen in Leeds in the Leeds City Council region, where you think that trust and infrastructure has been particularly strong, and what it was about those projects that engendered that trust and support from the community.
Thank you. I think visibility is a really important thing. So some of the projects that we've been involved in, where people can actually see things changing around them for the better. So one example that I would think about is some of our whole street retrofit work, where people have been able to see their neighbourhood change, and that might be in terms of their own houses, but also the infrastructure around them, and the fact that the street looks better and it's a better place for them to live and a better place for their children to be. So visibility, I think, makes a big difference. Another highly visible project is putting things like solar panels on schools. And schools are brilliant places to work, because when you're working on a school, if you put in something like solar panels on, it is very visible, it's very obvious, people can see it happening. Young people are brilliant to engage with as well, and we've had some super work in schools where, as that retrofit's happened and things have improved in the schools, young people have been engaged in measuring carbon, and some real brilliant climate lessons there. And then that trickles down into families. So I think visibility is really, really important, and it does make a difference if people can see things happening and see things improving. One example that people might be familiar with across Leeds, where we've had an amazing infrastructure project, is the Leeds Pipes Network. However, if you ask people in Leeds about it, people don't know it exists, because it's all underground and it's all hidden. So I think ways of making things visible, ways of making people see that change is actually happening, is really important.
No, that's great. Thank you, Katie. So, Christopher, maybe if I can come to you, and I think one of the things that we kind of see there is a real importance of momentum on projects. So, I suppose, and coming back to something John was talking about, how do you build that certainty and credibility to attract long-term investment into sustainable delivery within cities? When you might not have that same certainty of the political narrative, there's elections, there's change, there's governance challenges. How do you balance that? How do you overcome that when you're seeking investment in place? I appreciate you're coming from a perspective of seeing this across a wide array of local authorities, and so really interested to hear your view.
Well, local government is going through a big change in the way that it's being governed, both with devolution, local government reorganisation, and also the political leadership. And I think that presents opportunities, and it presents quite significant challenges. So we're going to have to, I think of a better phrase, but level up the way that we talk about climate projects and how we make the case, because I think, excellent points from Katie and John about this. But it's not a one and done. We always have to go out and keep making that case, especially with those multi-year, multi-decade projects that are going to take time to and the disruption and the impact are going to be felt forevermore. We can't just say, oh, well, we did a nice press release and you've got some nice nice borders around where we're digging up your road. We've got to make that case. We've got to tell the stories. And I think if we can tell those human stories and the impact that's going to have, this is an audience of probably very technical people, and there's very technical people on the stage, but how we make it relevant for individuals and how we tell those individual stories of transformation for people, I think builds that long-term buy-in, it builds that long-term credibility of the work that we're trying to do. Because if you think about how this infrastructure, how we can build those thriving communities, sustainable cities, which is the frame of the panel, it has to be taking into account some of those big macro trends. So money's hard. People find it really hard to pay for just the essentials. there is not the faith and trust in public institutions. People feel done too. A lot of infrastructure are going to play into the worst aspects of those three big macro trends. So the politics, and I'm going to loop back round to it, but the politics is going to be is a feeder of these things. And then on top of that, I would say a decline in local conversations, the third place where people congregate, trusted local voices as well, and the lack of local journalism. All of these things lead to kind of people trying to find information in different sources. Councils are very trusted institutions. It's one of the most trusted institutions just behind the NHS in place. So the more that they can do as an organisation, building that benefits case and also engaging with communities, I think it doesn't matter who the political leadership comes in, they will want to continue that work. They will want to see that investment and those benefits if the case is made early on. If it's not, it then becomes a victim. And if we get hung up on framing of certain things like net zero, that is going to have different reactions from different people and different politics. So, you've seen, you're alluding to it, I should imagine, but you've seen it with some reform councils and administrations that have come in, have realised that there isn't these huge net zero teams. And actually the primary driver of cost in councils, unitary councils and counties, is social care and how they get to grips with that. So I think you're going to see a maturity in some of the kind of populism that you're seeing, but it will be driven if we don't get those earlier things right.
Thank you. And I think one thing that you've touched on there, Chris, is a lot about the types of challenges that we see. And I think one thing that's often leveled at this country is that we are slower at infrastructure than other places. There's some truth in that. And you've alluded to some of the challenges. But Amy, perhaps if you'd like to just explore a little bit more what you see as some of the real barriers that prevent some, what I would call kind of complex systems thinking to infrastructure delivery in cities.
Yeah, hi. Just to touch on some of the points that have been made from the other panellists. I think the point that you just raised about what can local authorities do when, let's be honest, we can call it chaos in central government. I think that Chris didn't say it, but he meant to. They can offer some consistency to local businesses. So green economy, we work across party, lots of different local authorities, we're national. But what we've found is that if we're asking businesses to invest, they want a clear pathway. Money's tight and they want to know what they should be investing in and how they're going to do it. Most people are looking at decarbonising because they can't afford their energy bills. So yes, they're invested in the environment, but they also need to look at improving their resource efficiency because it makes good business sense. But there can be, we are going to be asking businesses to make financial investments today for future savings. They need to know that the path isn't going to change and that they're going to be asked to do something else. So it's really important that local authorities do provide that consistency. And that's definitely something that we've found in Manchester and Leeds. Both have set science-based targets to be net zero by 2038, so more ambitious than central government. And for any of you that was in the keynote speech this morning, sustainability and their commitments to it just ran through the presentations, and it was all about sustainable growth. That makes our job, the green economy, really easy because, well, that's a bit much. It's from really easier because there was a time when we're lobbying on behalf and speaking to businesses, trying to make the case that investing and putting practices in place that's going to improve your environmental performance does make good economic sense. We don't really need to do that as much now. I think the case is understood. I think our job now is to make sure that we understand what the local delivery plans are, what investments are being made, and then what we can do to help businesses react to those opportunities. I think some of the challenges that we're facing, back to your point around what can people see, is that we have been saying for a long time now that local supply chain, we're going to have these green jobs, there's going to be hundreds and thousands of them. And I think that we've still got people coming through the education system saying, well, where are they then? You know, I can't actually see these jobs, yet we still talk of them. And I think that we need to make sure that local communities and businesses are feeling that. So one thing that we're trying to do at Green Economy is we're mapping where the infrastructure projects are taking place across the local authorities, and then we're working with K Matrix to map what the supply chain requirements are and where the gaps in the supply chain are, and then how that ties into the local skills provision. And then we want to track learners that are coming through these skills provisions into jobs, so that then we can start communicating with local communities and businesses back to say, this is what investment was made, and this is what the impact was locally, and this is what the impact has been on the local authorities' carbon objectives. Now, there are a whole host of challenges in that. We talked about retrofit before. The retrofit economy in West Yorkshire is worth £1.9 billion. Now, what we're really invested in Green Economy is, wouldn't it be a real shame if £1.9 billion was spent to retrofit buildings and homes across West Yorkshire, and that didn't benefit the local retrofit supply chain here in West Yorkshire? So Green Economy have delivered a sector mapping report for retrofit for West Yorkshire, available on the website, where we've highlighted and drawn attention to the great companies that we've currently got in West Yorkshire. And we've also got a business support programme that is committed to identifying any gaps and filling them through our installer accelerator programmes. But we also want to share this information far and wide, so that it becomes criminal for any West Yorkshire local authority that wants to procure any of these goods and services and wants to dare look outside of West Yorkshire to do so. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. And I think there's a couple of really interesting themes come out of that, and I'd like to maybe turn back to actually all of the panellists for reflections on this, in terms of how then do you capture some of those benefits that are available to businesses, and also communicate those businesses where there isn't necessarily a direct link between the action that the business may take and the benefit that the business may get. It's often the benefit is often second or third order rather than direct, and that can make it quite difficult sometimes for businesses to take that first step. And then secondly, quite interested to just understand as well, we see Leeds and Manchester both being quite successful in this space, in comparison to authorities around the UK that are grappling with this a bit more. To what extent the maturity of the relationship between the combined authority and the city council is supporting that process? So I don't know who wants to pick up any of that first. John, do you want to?
There's one example comes to mind, actually, because one of the things we do as part of our engagement with local businesses is understand what a mass transit system might mean for them. And actually, one of the things we keep hearing is about reliability for their staff in getting to work. So you talk about there's different orders of benefits, and you're right, some are more intangible, some you're placing quite a bet for. But actually, and that's great, and that might be a really important part of a private investment case, but we've learned from some of the businesses we deal with that they often are very nervous about offering jobs to people in certain postcodes, because they know the transit system we have today doesn't mean they are going to get to the office as much as they need to. So actually, punctuality of staff and widening the catchment area for reliable punctuality is a key message, by way of an example.
Katie.
Just picking up on that point, it's not just the businesses, is it? It's the people who can then make the best of those opportunities. Because sometimes, even living on the outskirts of Leeds, you don't have to be too far away to feel that opportunities in the city centre are inaccessible to you. So that kind of reliability makes a difference to the businesses, but it makes a difference to the people who can access those opportunities too.
I think, for me, okay. I think we don't really need to convince a lot of businesses, because they seem to be a little bit further along on this journey than I think some local authorities. So when you see some of that interface and outreach, a lot of the time, we'll make some of these points that we're making on the panel, and the businesses say, well, we can give you all this data that shows that we're doing it. And we're probably further along than you are with your own fleet or with your own infrastructure assets and the things that we do. So I think that data piece is quite key. working together to kind of pull that data together, because if you look under these, you look under the rug, there's so much fantastic things that are already happening from the private sector in place already, and they're a little bit further ahead than I think we are in a lot of respects. Where I don't think they are as forthright is support for these projects, very vocal support. And I think we need that, because when fantastic politicians like Katie go out on a limb to kind of talk about ambitious projects for place and for area, usually everyone will then go for that figurehead. And so many times you have businesses saying, well, we really support what the council's doing, but they'll never say anything about it. They'll never put anything out on social media. They'll never I'm not talking about politically controversial projects, mind you, but the business coalition for, the tram, that may or may not be a tram in West Yorkshire. We need to see that. We need to see them come together, because there'll be so many businesses and organisations and communities that want to see this project succeed, for example, but then we'll be very quiet when it gets really hot and the debate gets really difficult.
And then, so Amy, maybe if I can come back to you. We've talked a lot about kind of that kind of narrative around place and around economic growth, but ultimately, part of why we're here on this panel today is to discuss delivering against climate goals. And doing that as part of communicating a message that is achieving other things alongside climate delivery. How important is that, or does that dilute from the climate message?
It's interesting because we've been, the team and I, looking at Vicky down there, sat in the front row, and we've done this work under a number of different names, organisations for years. We've called it a whole host of different things. We've called it resource efficiency, decarbonisation, climate change, net zero. Now we don't say net zero because we're not allowed to say net zero because everyone hates net zero. We've talked about it, we're not green and fluffy, it's all about the economic gain. And then good old Greta came along, so we went back to talking about the environment. But I think that when Greater Manchester started delivering a sector development programme, and it was deemed innovative in 2012, and Vicky and I have been delivering sector development across the north since around 2008. But what's really interesting is the reasons initially is because the green tech and services sector is outperforming the UK in terms of sales. It's got significant economic importance to local areas. We've recently done a sector mapping report for West Yorkshire. I think the first one was done last year. And it was the first time that they got to grips with those stats. So West Yorkshire and Greater Manchester are innovative in a sense that they have coupled the economic benefits of this net zero transition and climate emergency and the fact that we might all die into economic benefits for businesses. We did a report for the Local Government Association, and it was all about making local authorities consider that as an innovative business model. So we interviewed 300 local authorities and put it to them that they should be investing in local supply chains. Yet it's still not happening very quickly, and I don't fully understand why, because the economics around supporting that existing thriving supply chain to grow, because as a local area, it's economically important, not only because without those businesses, we can't actually deliver net zero goals. It's still confusing to me. I think the thing that's really important now, and through the latest data that we're sharing with local authorities, is there's more and more importance on building local supply chains, because as the whole of the UK transitions to net zero, you actually do need a local supply chain, because there aren't going to be the capacity and skills to borrow from neighbouring city regions. It's going to be more important than ever. We used to have a role years ago. It was all about green economy's role was to advocate for local suppliers to help them get into supply chain projects. But over the last few years, we've had a slightly different role where we're now advocating for the buyer, because there's more projects out and about now, and the supply chain are picking and choosing. So we've had a role working for local authorities to try and encourage them to work with their tier one contractor with a flooded market where they're getting to pick and choose. So we're now advocating the other way.
That's great, thank you. I'm going to move us on now to our next theme. So next theme we're going to talk about is partnerships. And so just for a bit of context, for ourselves at the National Wealth Fund, we've been asked by the Treasury to set up specific strategic partnerships with 4 regions across the UK, of which Greater Manchester and West Yorkshire would like to say are 2 of those, and the others being Glasgow and West Midlands. And in doing that, we're bringing together a lot of different stakeholders across the public sector to try and help to deliver for those regions. We've also brought in Homes England, who are doing the same and supporting with a similar mandate, particularly as well in this region and in Manchester. So really interested to hear from the panel around the importance of partnerships more broadly. And maybe, Amy, if I can start with you. The Green Economy's had that partnership with West Yorkshire for some time. Can you maybe just give a bit of background to that and explain why that's so important for the Combined Authority?
Yeah, I think it's a funny one, isn't it? The old threat to humanity kind of takes away any competition. I think lots of the city regions want to say, like, we're the first to get to net zero. But actually, I think we're at a point now where the scale of the challenge, it's so difficult that collaborative working, it's kind of like the only way forward. I was talking to Chris about this through, sharing information through the partners through the UK 100. And in the opening this morning, I think that was a heavy theme there. So we had gone to West Yorkshire and shared with them the projects that we were delivering across Greater Manchester, because we knew that they were already delivering business decarbonisation support through their business growth hub, but they didn't have a provision in place to grow their local supply chain and connect the dots there. So we pitched the business support programme. And then it's been really helpful because we've also piloted projects in Greater Manchester. So, for example, the Installer Accelerator programme that I mentioned earlier, we're aware that with the ambitious climate change targets and the strategies that are in place, neither city region has the supply chain in place to deliver those. I think in Greater Manchester, when we looked at the solar installer pilot, there was around 38 MCS accredited solar installers working across Greater Manchester. So we constructed an installer accelerator programme which took level 3 plumbers and electricians through a course to get them the skills they need to deliver solar installation. And then we worked with MCS and Solar Trade Association and the distributors to get them the skills, the accreditations, and then Green Economy delivered the business support to help them win their first job so that they could then become MCS accredited. There was a whole host of challenges we faced through that pilot, understanding that it's not that easy to convince busy people to retrain, even if it's free. So we needed the private sector to put their hands in their pockets and cover the cost, and also the challenges of helping them win their first work. But what it did enable, that we delivered 2 of those pilots in Manchester. We've got 18 new installers now operating, which is a huge difference on top of the 38 that were already working there. But since then, we've now delivered, I think it's 6 installer accelerators, 2 in the retrofit space and 4 in the solar space across West Yorkshire. So there's now 46 new installers operating across West Yorkshire. And what's been really great is that both combined authorities have been really interested in hearing updates from us around what we've delivered in each area, where they've got common challenges and how they can come together to overcome them.
That's great, thank you. And Chris, you're working with 120 plus local authorities. When you see something that's innovative and really demonstrating signs of success in a particular region, what's your sense for how well that's being shared across local authorities, and what are some of the mechanisms that you think can accelerate some of that kind of sharing of best practice within the local authority market?
The sector isn't very good at talking to each other or sharing. They're quite good at sharing what works. They're not so good at sharing what hasn't worked and what they learned from it. And I think as we move towards the kind of the plethora of different climate interventions that we need to make, we need to up our risk tolerance. We are not prepared to try things and fail as a sector. Because of the absolute laser-like accountability that comes from within the council in itself. They're sometimes their own harshest critics. If anyone's ever gone to a scrutiny committee, you'll see that. But it then makes it harder to, especially with all the bureaucracy and all of the kind of the frameworks that councils operate under, to really kind of foster innovation. And I think trying something and failing, learning from it and trying again, hopefully succeeding, but if not failing and learning better next time, is where I think the sector needs to move to. The best partnerships I see is when there's an honesty about the risk and reward ratio between the council and the partner. If you're looking at the kind of partnerships that work well, you need these partnerships because you need to bring the people, the pounds and the place together. And you're not always necessarily seeing that with the risk and reward ratios being out of kilter. There's still sometimes an adversarial relationship, which I think sometimes unnecessary. So an example I had was recently talking to a business and a council, and that relationship was around EV charging. And what you had was the council saying, well, we're not prepared to lease our land to put this EV charging in for 30 years with this supplier, because we don't know if it's going to work, we don't know if we're going to make a good return from it, we don't know if it's in the right place, we don't understand the technology in its entirety. So we'll do something a lot more short term, maybe 1 or 2 years. The company was then saying, well, we're not going to be making that investment because it takes us 5 years to pay off or 10 years to pay off the infrastructure investment, and we've got to go to the grid and get the grid connections and all this kind of stuff. So you had this circular argument where they're just going round and round and it wasn't breaking through. So we need to kind of, again, think about, well, what's the honesty there? Just be honest about what you're going to need between those two partners, because to get the certainty and the clarity and the good partnerships, you've got to build those relationships. It's a very technical thing we're trying to do, but ultimately it always goes back to people, whether it's communities or whether it's those relationships between those organisations. I think is going to be key, and it's where it's working well.
Thank you. That brings us now onto some Q&A from the audience, please. So we've got two very keen hands already that were shot up before there's even a mic making its way around. So we do have a mic on the far side. So please do put your hand up if you've got a question. The lady in the front row was very quick, so we'll come to her first.
Hello, Claire Townley, eco-poet and climate communicator. I'm doing something at lunchtime in the Innovation Hub. I just wanted to ask you, 20 years ago, we were one of the first solar installers in the country, and we wanted to install solar panels on our town centre premises, and we came across every barrier possible. The local authority didn't really want us to put them there. If we did put them there, they wanted us to put ones that looked like tiles, so they didn't look visible, and we were trying to do exactly what you say and actually advertise being green, and this is what we do. No grants, no help with training. As soon as we've got through all the red tape to put them up, we then got a visit from the rating officer to say we'd added value to the building and they were going to put the rates up. So it was exactly the opposite of what you want it to be. And there is a question coming eventually. What are local authorities and organisations resisting now that you will look back on in 20 years and think we should have been encouraging that?
Do you want me to pick up on that
Katie.
one? I mean, you've explained very, very well how difficult it can be to get things that we now see the benefits of, and I've seen examples of that in my local community. In terms of infrastructure, I would hope that we are way ahead of that. Certainly in Leeds, we're really aware of what we need to do, and we have put a lot of kind of commitment into our climate agenda and the things that we need to do. In terms of what are we resisting now?
I think so much mean Leeds.
Yeah. In terms of what we're resisting now, I would hope the answer is we're a lot more open than that. I mean, to use your example of solar panels, there are still examples of places where it's more difficult than it should be. And we have examples of places in conservation areas or religious buildings where we are having conversations about exactly that, putting solar panels in there. But I would really hope that we're not going to look back in 20 years and say we should have been more accepting of this. I would hope that we're a lot more open to innovation than that.
Amy?
Just to follow on that point about innovation, I'm nervous that we're going to look back at how much money has been spent by local authorities and the amount of money that has not gone to grow the local supply chain. And I think that, there's still a lot of nervousness around innovation and innovative products, and solar PV is still falling under that category. So we've got loads of products and services that we know are working and are still, there's still a lot of risk-averse local authorities in terms of who they're going to procure to fit those products. So you see it that if there's a framework or something already in place where they can allocate that money to a tier one contractor, the money goes to them, and then the trail is so long where it finally might get to, the local installer. And my concern is that how much money has been wasted in the middle because of the risk or the concern around just directly procuring the company that's going to be ultimately fitting it. So there's still a lot of work that we're doing with local authorities, looking at exactly what standards you're putting in place, like what size of liability insurance do you want them to hold? Because sometimes that is, a huge barrier to the local businesses actually benefiting from the investments being made.
Thank you. We maybe have to take next question. So we'll take the chap on the end, 4 rows back.
Hello, thanks very much. I'm really interested in what you've had to say about the infrastructure side of the green economy and everything like that. I want to just focus a little bit on sort of nature restoration and biodiversity enhancement, because that's not really been touched on. And I'm just really interested in what your experiences are with working with businesses and working with local councils, etc., in terms of biodiversity enhancement and nature restoration.
Yeah, I think that's actually quite a good question to follow on from the one before, because potentially that is one area where it is quite difficult to get moving at the moment, and also to encourage the market to participate in that space. So I don't know who wants to take that first.
I've got the mic, so I'll kick off. I think this has been on a maturity journey. So you've had probably about 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the kind of climate conversations I would have with councils tended to be, well, we're planting trees. That's okay. What else are you doing? So I think we've moved away from that. If you look at, say, Liverpool, what they've done around kind of their urban greening project, I think was absolutely fantastic. And they talked about the kind of the co-benefits of that nature investment and restoration, how it's kind of improved property values, how it's kind of improved the amount of people walking to work, the health outcomes. We are going to need to, I think if you fast forward 10, 15 years, the ecological emergency in this country, we will look back and go, why wouldn't we be doing this stuff a lot more quickly and a lot more investment? Because the adaptation piece, we were talking about this in the green room, is going to be so important, and the economic costs of not investing now in proper, serious adaptation and those green kind of infrastructure pieces is going to have so many more dividends as we go later on for us. If I could just touch on BNG, biodiversity net gain, good policy. Why wouldn't you, if you're developing an area, you would have an additional kind of nature contribution onto it or onto kind of a central part. But it's become this bloated mess where the investments are being kind of held up in the planning system. You've also got the planning portal, which doesn't kind of properly evidence sites that are not eligible for BNG, and there's no enforcement. So you've got bad bureaucracy, no enforcement, and really poor outcomes. So if you want an example of where you have a good policy and it gets completely gutted in its implementation, I think BNG is one of those.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to move us on to another question. I'm keen to make sure that we get a number of questions from the floor, and I saw some more hands. I think we've got one hand. There was another hand up that was up last time, but we'll come here to the second row.
Hi, Andy Abudu from Imagine Leeds. There's a lot of talk about engaging people and talking with local communities, and also that collaborative working is the only way forward, which I absolutely agree with, because, we do have a climate emergency. We do all need to pull together. So, speaking as someone who runs a venue where we are aiming to bring communities, local businesses, local authority people, etc., together. How do you think, or what are the best ways that you're thinking of accelerating that collaborative working so that it's not, kind of the council out here and government out here and everyone kind of struggling in the middle? I know Katie's probably got some good answers to that already.
Thank you, Anzi. Yeah, I'll start with this one. In my experience, working really hyper locally is where we've had some of our best successes. So the ward that I represent was one of the original pilots for the Climate Action Leeds hubs. And what we managed to do was hand the responsibility over to local people and say, it's your climate hub, what would you like to see? What projects interest you? And we managed to get a really interesting and diverse group of people involved, all of whom worked on their own thing. And I think that was really successful. And I know across Leeds that has been replicated in many different areas. So I think that's one thing, the ability to work really locally. And then the second thing is to be able to sell benefits to people that affect all aspects of their lives. So it isn't just about fighting the climate emergency, it's about improving your life, and that might be in terms of green spaces, it might be in terms of your living standards at home, the way you're eating, the way you're heating your house and things like that. Because I think that then gives people something to say, yes, please, I'm in. And I think that's really important nowadays. I think Chris spoke earlier in the session about the fact that we are having to appeal to people with lots of different ideas about what it is, and that goes right from people who are absolutely passionate about doing everything they can to people who are climate skeptics and everybody in between, and yet we need everybody on this journey. So I think being able to include benefits to people's lives and say this is going to help you is really important too.
Chris, quickly.
Just to add to that really quickly, bringing in young people. We are passing policies and strategies that affect a place for 15, 20, 30 years, yet we don't have young voices as part of that process at all, which seems absolutely bizarre to me. Some places are doing it really well. It's not a sweeping generalisation, but as a whole, we're not good at bringing those voices in.
That's a really good point. I think we've hopefully got time for one more. Yeah, time for one more. So I'd see a hand there, sixth row back, third or fourth. So you think that's you with the jumper? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, it was actually the same question as a colleague at the end of the row, but I'll change it just slightly. So green space and the value of that, and we know that it's got a great value. We've talked about the sense of place, talked about investment, inward investment, well-being, and indeed climate resilience. So, and yet, potentially we're on the same journey we were 20 years ago for climate or carbon, and yet we still have this carbon myopia. So, we've touched on that, but maybe from the panel, can you give us some examples where you've managed to retrofit biodiversity, nature restoration, nature-based solutions, and what the policy drivers might have been to allow you to do that?
Can I come into this? Yeah, I was going to add this before. I can see Vicky's like mouthing me from the audience. Like, don't forget this. That it's mad that because in Manchester, I remember 10 years ago, we had this huge conference and it was bizarre because what we were talking about is how do we quantify the value of a tree? And I thought, how depressing is this world now where we're looking at the economic value of something? Because if we can't work it out, then there's no value to it and there'll be no trees and no green space. It just seemed really bizarre. And we were trying to look at the health implications and NHS, and it got into like mental well-being. So could we say if they cut down trees and people killed themselves and they were to blame? And I was thinking, this is just insane that we've like lost our way and it's gone this far. That same team in Greater Manchester, have now gone on. I think COVID was a big marker in it, because it was like, wow, we all stopped and we went outside and we liked parks again. And we realised that it was nice having green spaces and the air was cleaner and things like that. In Greater Manchester, they launched the Green Spaces Fund, and I'm not sure if there's the equivalent that's being done here, but the first thing that had come to my mind was that I mentioned already that we've been doing these sector mapping reports. We've been doing them for 20 years. And in this report, looking at 23 data, we've actually now got a new taxonomy that includes nature-based solutions. It's actually classified as a sector with stuff in it and companies. But interestingly, there was a conversation that we had with Trafford Council where we were trying to convince them to put green roofs on properties that had flat roofs and they were renovating them. But they said they just couldn't justify the economic return on it. And I thought, that's really depressing. But I do feel like we've moved on from that, because in Manchester now, there's a whole host of buildings that have got green walls on them. And again, there was one point after Grenfell where green roofs and walls were classed as cladding. So there were lots of buildings that had planning permission to put green walls on, and then they were going back and taking them off because the insurers were classing it as cladding and a fire risk, which is insane because they were covering it in frickin' sprinklers and it was going to be wet all the time to keep the plants alive. Yet they couldn't get around the red tape and it was going to delay the projects, add costs, so they were just taking these green walls off. But we're not seeing that anymore. And now the buildings in GM that have got a lower carbon footprint and they've got bees on the roof and they've got green walls, more and more businesses are now moving into them, because now more and more businesses are understanding Scope 3 emissions, and they've done a big chunk of the work, and they've realised that unless they can sort out the building fabric, and if they're in a rented space, there isn't much they can do there. So we are seeing now way more investment being put into nature-based solutions to make buildings more attractive for tenants to move into them. So I do think, like, from the time that we've been working in this space, we've seen a massive improvement from can we justify why a tree should exist to helping businesses make better choices in terms of the buildings they occupy.
Thank you. I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up there. If I can just have 30 seconds to close and maybe summarise some of the fantastic contributions that the panel have made. If I can try and do that in a few words, I will do. I think some key words that we've heard today around product delivery, visibility, really important. We heard that a lot from Katie, and also we heard a lot about momentum and the importance of that. From everybody, we heard about investing in local supply chains and the importance of finding those green jobs, but also making those green jobs available to young people, creating the skills opportunities, the training opportunities for people in these regions to flourish and to I suppose, see that future career path in this sector, which I think is really important. We talked about the quality of data, and we also talked about the openness and transparency with which local authorities communicate with one another. So being willing to share failures as well as share successes. And then finally, and I think what a lot of things always come back to is the importance of building those relationships and sustaining those relationships across organisations. So thank you all very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you here, and thank you to the fantastic panel for their contributions.